I'm Steven.
And I'm Spencer. Welcome to Ragnarokast, your podcast for all things marketing and MarTech.
Hello, everyone. We're the co-CEOs of Ragnarok. From the hit studio Smash comes three guys at a table.
And a lot of unstructured data.
Ooh. All right, everybody. Welcome. We've got my co-host, Stephen Aldrich here.
Hey, it's me, Steven Aldrich.
That was recorded on video. And we've also got our friend Ari here. Hi, Ari.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Also known as the A-Train.
All right. So, Ari, welcome. You are from the land of Littledata.
That's true.
A company that is on both sides of the pond.
Also true.
So do you mind introducing yourself and a little bit about the old LD?
Sure. So yeah, in short, I'm Ari. I lead on the strategy and growth side at Littledata, and we started in the UK. We have employees all over Europe and also North America now, and we're a first-party data platform. We do revenue tracking mostly for Shopify brands, also a few on BigCommerce now.
Revenue tracking. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, sure. So, we've taken a little bit of a different approach than other players in the attribution world or even in the data world where, one of the reasons we call the company Littledata is because we're focused on what we call the little data that makes the biggest difference.
Ooh.
I like that. And,
e-commerce is complicated, but it doesn't have to be. That's sort of our mission and how we think about things. And one of the reasons we work with Ragnarok a lot, and you guys are such a great partner, is that we also send data back to Segment. And so from there, our whole idea is that it makes it really easy for a brand to just plug and play rather than getting lost in GTM and custom tagging and stuff, and just track that revenue, tie it back to user behavior, and then send it on to Segment where people like Ragnarok can then do amazing things with it.
Awesome. So it's purely in the e-commerce space, or do you work in other industries as well?
Only e-commerce.
Right on.
And mostly like digitally native brands. But as you guys are, I don't know, maybe you're seeing this too, like there are more and more traditional retailers, especially during the pandemic, like moved into that space and especially started using Shopify.
Right on.
Shopify, it's kind of insane that they just keep growing and even moving more and more up market.
I mean, they power apps and point of sale systems now, they're kind of running the whole vertical stack now.
what we'd like to get into today is attribution and privacy. So attribution is a bit of a tricky subject these days. How do you achieve accurate attribution in these days where our friends like Google are making this a little bit harder?
Yeah, I mean, I guess attribution is definitely a can of worms. We built things in a way because we initially integrated with Google Analytics. It's still like the core of a lot of other stuff we do. Now we push data back for what we call data for action. So you can do stuff, run better ads, run better retargeting, all that. But it still started with GA. And so we needed to follow Google's very strict PII regulations. And so being GDPR and CCPA and et cetera compliant was like a part of what we did. So without getting too much into the weeds, like we think about it as we track as much anonymous behavior as consistently as we can, and then identify users only at a later point where it would make sense because they've actually become a customer. And so you were pushing data back to Facebook and Google and soon Klaviyo, but that is not something where we can actually see who the user is. And that's been more of our approach. So it's kind of like only making the most of what you can see while still being like a good citizen.
Yeah.
Because we think things are going to, and you're already seeing it with the changes happening in Safari over the last couple of years and the iOS updates and now Chrome. Like there's no way that those sketchy cookies or sketchy approaches are going to work.
And you mentioned GDPR. So, and you're a multinational, multi-continental company. E-commerce is all over the world. How do you stay compliant and maintain privacy like in the US versus in Europe versus anywhere else you might have clients?
It is a very complicated thing, especially for our merchants. And, partly how we do it is we've just made sure to integrate really closely with Shopify's own privacy API. And I'm not on the product side, so I don't want to say the wrong thing about how exactly they've done that. But I know that part of the idea is that because the regulations are different. It's kind of like assuming opt-in, double opt-out in all these different places. And it is a bit different. But if you have any customers in those countries, you do need to comply technically with the regulations. And so we have tried to start by just respecting the way that Shopify has set up the privacy API to deal with those multi-store, multi-country setups, and then kind of expand from there. And we do, as part of our audit process and onboarding with larger brands, we actually just go through and help double check that. For one thing, even the cookie banners somebody's using are actually respecting the choices users make, because you'd be surprised at how few do that by default.
So when you hit reject all, it's actually accepting all.
It's not doing anything.
But yeah,
It's
so what happens,
recording
if you
something.
reject all, we're making sure that then the brand respects that.
Got it. Yeah.
And it is amazing. I mean, I'd be curious to learn more from the Ragnarok side too, because I know you work with some really large companies now. As brands are expanding in all of these different countries, it's become, I should have looked up the stats beforehand, but I know just a lot more of our brands that it used to be they'd have one store in the EU and they'd launch in another couple of EU countries. Now it's they're also launching in Australia and Japan and Brazil here.
Yeah, it's interesting because essentially what we see with a lot of our clients is they sort of take a one-size-fits-all approach because it's just very, very difficult to maintain different privacy compliances across different markets. Because you have customers who, for example, maybe they're on a proxy network or something like that, and they are a shopper in the UK or in the EU, but they're on the US site because they just typed in your .com name, and typically you would redirect them to your EU shop or something like that would have that kind of that location IP lookup that sort of forces them into the right experience, and then they get all the way through the checkout experience. And they go to actually buy it, and then they can't select their country from the drop down because it's in the default.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, you've collected their email address without a checkbox for opt-in. You could have done all these different actions that would have gotten to the point where it's now that you're not actually compliant anymore because you know where they are. And it's really, really hard to tell all of your other downstream systems to be hey, wait, this person's not compliant, right? You kind of do that at the point of collection, and then you reverse when you get the request in to delete or don't share your information or forget me or whatever the GDPR type requests are. So we tend to see it where most brands will just be GDPR compliant if they are kind of doing anything in the EU as a focus. But if they're in North America, and they plan to expand to Canada, then we tend to see them following the California and Canada regulations, which are a bit more stricter. And then people who are just in the US essentially just, throw two fingers to the air and say, well, we don't care until the states tell us not to. But yeah, it is interesting because even on some of the compliance side that we're seeing with SMS collection, for example, that's actually different per state. Did you know in the state of Oklahoma, you can't send people marketing SMS between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. It's illegal. So that's a very weird regulation. But when you leave it up to 50 separate entities in one country to make up their own rules based on what their people complain about, ultimately you're going to get a lot of funky things to have to comply with. And that's a struggle that a lot of brands are going to have. So they like to just adapt a single, simplify it as much as possible. This is the compliance we're going to follow and kind of leave it there.
Interesting. Are you seeing a lot more? SMS is very interesting in particular because we're seeing, more brands experimenting with it, but mostly in the US. It seems like the regulations in other places are so complicated that, I don't know, we're just not seeing as much uptake.
Well, I also think if you're in the EU, you have WhatsApp as a channel.
Yep.
So you got a little bit more, you have a better channel than SMS ultimately. I mean, they kind of do the same thing. Their phone number connected, but WhatsApp is just infinitely better in terms of what you can do with it.
So on Facebook and Google, our friends Meta and Alphabet.
It's true. It just sounds funny when you say it like that.
Meta and Alphabet, yeah. That was in a trivia question the other day. What are the parent companies? And I got it right. And I was yeah.
Dork. Sorry.
Oh, well. So, Facebook and Google are sort of walled gardens in there's a lot of hidden data in there. How would Littledata, or how would you go about helping them to unlock that?
I mean, first of all, we've chosen to go our product philosophies go very deep on the main tools that most brands use. And so that's why we're not, we don't integrate with every ad platform out there. We've really focused on Google to start, built that up, and then well, back when it was Facebook, and then now Meta, which we support Facebook and Instagram. And then just this last year, we added Pinterest and TikTok because we have seen not a ton of brands, but those brands that are crushing it on TikTok are really crushing it.
Yeah.
And so if they build an audience, it's still relatively cheap to find, basically a lot of really relevant users really fast to build paid on top of that. So we push server-side data back into those platforms. And so, basically our approach is like those companies, they all, give lots of lip service to anonymity and think what you might about what any of them actually believes. But it's really just they all want to own the data themselves, right? I mean, same with Shopify for good reason. And so we're making it easy to push data back and even to set up, say, retargeting when somebody removes something from a cart and be able to retarget them without having to expose any PII because you're able to just then, say, run a TikTok ad, show them more relevant stuff from other, say, coffee subscription brands without knowing who they are. If that makes sense. So we're kind of respecting what the platforms have asked,
Right. Is that just on like a device ID level match, or how are you able to kind of forward that back to them?
Yeah, and they have their own first party cookies, so we're matching that with the anonymous IDs basically.
Got it.
As soon as we can. And then it's also like eventually we're stitching it together with the Shopify customer ID.
Right. So that you get more of like a traditional type of match key, but you're not sending the PII back to them still when you have a...
Right.
So you're essentially using like a user ID, or I guess the Shopify customer ID concept.
And for segment, then there's a number of user IDs that you can choose now.
Right.
I mean, I think we actually had this on one. I can't say who it was, but that they some want to use no ID, want to use their own ID, or just a hashed email, which is still a little sketch.
Right.
Or, but usually you want to tie back to some sort of customer ID.
Got it. So when you work with like Facebook's conversion API, which is a partnership that Spencer and I had with them many, many years ago. We would actually go into different clients and set up basically conversion API for them, like before Segment supported it, and there was a lot more direct integration, so people had to manage their own, which was like 4 years ago or 3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, it was. We started it up in 2018.
Oh, right.
And it went for 2 years into COVID.
Well, that was the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were pushing, I remember they were pushing lots of brands to do it. That's how we first started hearing about it.
Yeah.
And they're like, can you help? And at that point, we're like, no, like you should talk to Ragnarok or someone else. And then gradually we figured out how to do it, at least build a very deep integration just for Shopify.
Right. But
even during the program, like it started out where we were just implementing the Pixel.
Yep.
And then like about halfway through, they were like, okay, we're gonna push Cappy. Like you got to go in that direction.
Yeah.
You got to cap it.
Yeah, you got to.
But Cappy, almost requires you to give them these, quote unquote match keys, which would be PII data, more or less. I mean, you're hashing it, but ultimately you're sending them PII data that they can unhash on their side. So when you talk about actually sending them data, you're never even sending them hashed PII. Like it's all basically web ID tokens or as you call it, like pixel IDs, device IDs, things like that. And they have to kind of suss out if they have that same identifier on their side.
Yeah, but I think with Cappy, I think we actually do.
Okay.
But it's on the back end, so the brand themselves wouldn't know.
Right.
It's just so that Facebook can then identify them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all server side.
Yeah, that's all server side. And that's another mistake. I mean, it is kind of like capping pixel, right? Like it's not like you get rid of the pixel. It's just unifying the data.
Right.
So not necessarily privacy aside, but privacy aside, or in mind, how are the DTC brands, once the data is available, how are they using it? Like what and how are they using it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is really back to the basics. So it's retargeting. And then I would say retention marketing has become a big one. And that's where actually the PII issues are much less at the top. It's really more like, how do you just personalize it and make it useful?
Yeah.
Because someone's agreed, they've bought, maybe they've even subscribed. We work with a lot of subscription brands, and more brands are at least trying subscription. Even, sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes you're like, why would you subscribe to a yoga mat every month?
Yeah.
But like everybody's trying it, and a lot.
You'd be surprised. I bet there's someone out there that's subscribing to a yoga mat.
I like all the colors, different colors every month.
It's like Rent-A-Center. They take away the yoga mat if you don't pay your $10.
We say, yes, what are basically, and then it's sort of trying to find more high LTV customers, like finding audiences that are going to, be there and be like your core community. We're seeing that a lot, especially in the last couple of years, because I know everybody has CAC concerns and budgets are coming back, but they're still not what they used to be.
Stephen, I think you have a anonymized case study as a good example of a success story.
You know, the brand
Anonymized.
with the
thing.
Yeah, so a little bit maybe more related to some of the cookie stuff. But you mentioned like some people have those banners, they don't actually honor their permission. So one of our large marketplace brands that we worked with, we actually were working through a OneTrust implementation, which I'm sure you guys work with them or have a kind of partnership with them. But they were sort of setting up like actually collecting and putting definitions against things. And they had found something like 180 cookies that were being set, and they had no idea what they were or where they were from. So they basically, we came on and kind of launched this really in-depth investigation of trying to uncover what these all were. And it was, it's an exercise in a lot of futility because you don't really know. So not every brand or platform out there actually documents well enough to tell you what cookies they're setting. So a lot of it is we had to sort of understand what tools they were using, then go back to those tools and say, are you setting any cookies? And if so, is it any of these from this list? And we had to do that, like multiplied by however 180 cookies. About 40 of those were set from different like internal services, microservices that they had set up that had long since been deprecated, but we're still setting cookies and things like that. But it was interesting to see that like a user could go in and like inspect in Chrome and see what cookies were being set, and
they
there
have
was
no idea like where they're coming from and why.
Yeah, but there was a lot of like stuff in there that would give me pause, in terms of what they were collecting, and so part of that consolidation exercise was to kind of honor like, all right, well, this is actually an analytics use case, or this is a marketing use case. So you mentioned like there's retention uses, there's the retargeting stuff. Like, how do people on, like kind of relating that back to that, that anonymized case study that we worked on, but, how do you kind of think about that from, like, are you kind of guiding them on, this is prescriptive, like, this is the kind of cookies that you need to collect, or this is the way that you should collect it? Or is it like, our platform just kind of, it's a plug and play, like we handle it for you. You just might need to give us some guidance on like what this particular cookie means if we don't have it in our database.
Yeah, good question. It kind of depends on the size of the store and how long they've been around too, because a lot of the time there are these sort of like ghost scripts, or like you said, like old microservices that they're not using, but they're still somehow like there lurking. And so it is totally plug and play, but then during the first month, at least the first couple of weeks, but often depending on like, client priorities and stuff, sometimes it'll take a little longer, and we'll go through and we do an audit of all the tracking setup, and then including the cookies that seem to be there. Because sometimes it's a question of just do they want to keep them, and exactly like investigating where do they come from.
Right.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And then, but our whole goal with our app is we really just want to be this really, secure revenue tracking pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just storing the data long enough to backfill it if something goes down or Shopify's down for a second. Which doesn't happen often at all, but it does happen.
Right.
And then that's it. And so then the data lives wherever they're sending it. Right. And sometimes now that's to BigQuery via GA4. Sometimes it's to Segment, and then from Segment to Snowflake and to Amplitude and other places.
Makes sense.
You had mentioned like soon Klaviyo. So would you mind giving us a 30 to 60 second blurb on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, we're really excited about building it. And I'll just say that the sort of the prelude is that we already track email and SMS campaigns and conversions. And so what we've now been working on is a way to push the data back to platforms, starting with Klaviyo, because it's definitely the biggest in the Shopify world. And we're, initial tests, we're seeing really good results. And it's basically the core of it is the ability to identify more Klaviyo users for retargeting, where you already, similar to what we were saying, where Klaviyo kind of has the data and you have it, but it's just because sessions break or all kinds of other things go wrong that you're not able to just immediately build an audience and retarget.
Got it.
Is this particular to just web data, or is it also app data as well?
It's just web data to start. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, we'll keep a lookout for it. I look forward to being retargeted.
Yeah.
On Klaviyo and Littledata. And so just on I know Littledata has clients of various sizes. There's multiple use cases no matter the scale. But however, if a D2C brand, which I assume most of them want to, they want to scale. What would you suggest, or how can Littledata like unlock a scale, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would say number one, like hire a good agency. I mean, really, not just because we're here on the podcast, but like it's, so many of these brands it's amazing to me. They can be doing 20 million a year, but it's really, the team is very small. It's very strapped. Everybody is wearing lots of hats. And so it's kind of like, you need to create a growth plan before you even create a data tracking plan, like a growth plan, like really, what is your goal?
Yep.
Do you know your customers? I mean, first, of course, do you have a product that people actually want? So that's, but hopefully you do at that point. And then it's like, really, what is the growth plan? And then what are the steps to get there? Not just how do we suddenly get a bigger return in the next 30 days or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you, because obviously you guys are on the data tracking side, do people come to you without like core defined use cases? And you have to kind of walk them back a little bit to say, well, here's what we actually solve for, and here's where you're misaligned and what we think we solve for. Like, is there a lot of that in kind of your exploration or your prospect conversations?
There is. I'd say more than I would have thought when we started the company, and now and it's become even more so because, well, partly just because GA4, the launch was like such a mess on Google's side.
Right.
In my view, I mean, we like working with Google, but it's been a big learning curve for a lot of people, and sort of fixes were slowly rolled out.
Well, it also is really, really hard to use if you're coming from UA, for sure.
Yeah. So that's we've. To solve for that, we started creating a sort of GA4 training program. And so we do that instead of focusing just on getting Littledata set up, and obviously getting the tracking right is one part of it. But then we actually do GA4 training, both like private webinars for clients, but then also one-on-one with agencies and merchants. But I guess to really answer your first question, it's often people come to us not with this big grandiose plan, but it's just like, we noticed that these numbers don't match.
Right.
Which over time, as you get bigger, suddenly like a 5-10% discrepancy between what you see in Shopify and what you see in Facebook or Google is concerning.
But should they ever match? Like, would you expect that the data in Shopify would match Facebook,
yeah, well,
Google?
From our perspective, the revenue should match. And that's what we help. Our app does get it to, at 100% or 99.99%.
Right. Like on a gross revenue perspective,
yes.
but obviously
and it should
Shopify,
account for returns, and you should be able to tell what's
returns.
a subscription, what's not, that kind of stuff.
Got it. Okay, so it's like net, it should be 1-to-1 in terms of, wow.
And all the same with country stores. So if, again, with the multinational thing, some people are using Shopify Markets. There's some they're using different apps. Some are set up different country stores, which is their old way of doing it. Like that should match too in the individual currencies. But also we're seeing more brands want to just do one big warehouse or roll up with like all the stores pushing to one place.
Got it.
When you say country store, I think of like, I just see you in like with like a farmer
My
hat.
Panama hat. Oh.
Come on in. We got some Littledata here.
Would you like a pack of jelly beans to go with
Barb!
We're whittling Littledata.
Barb! The pigs are squealing again. Anyway, so beyond the exciting new Klaviyo partnership, do you have any other features or things on the horizon, things you want to share, hoax
sure.
streams?
Yeah, a lot of what we're still seeing a lot of use of Segment from our larger customers. So it's been very cool. Like Segment has really enhanced their own, I would say, in a way, it's like full circle back to the CDP use cases.
Yep.
But their own CAPI connection is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for those users, they're just using us to go from Shopify to Segment and then back to CAPI and doing just really cool stuff. And also using that data for personalization. We're seeing a lot more of that.
So is that use case, because I guess you're connecting the client and the server integration.
Yep.
So you're bringing back in like the FB click ID or FB seal ID and the
exactly.
JID. Got it.
Yeah. And so it's unifying that client and server, or what they call like cloud, right? So and then you're able to use identify calls to like do interesting stuff with it.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, for us, feature-wise, we spent a lot of time on this last year on actually just building out ways to validate the tracking. Because it does come down to those like small differences can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never want to get into the reporting space ourselves. We work with great reporting partners, or we help brands do it in GA. But we've built ways there are a few different features, but they're basically ways that you go into the app and then you can send a test order and make sure that it goes through and see all the properties associated with it, or see the discrepancy, what you would be missing if you didn't have server-side tracking, that sort of thing. And so kind of like tools for data geeks, but making them that make me really excited, but making them like accessible to everybody.
And on that note, you mentioned Segment several times, and that jogged my memory. Stephen tagged me into a LinkedIn conversation the other day that was pretty interesting. And Stephen, do you want to, maybe you can get Ari's take on that whole thing?
Oh, yeah. So one of our partners, Simon Data, their CEO, Jason Davis, posted Twilio had a major departure, to this and major departure. My first thought was, well, nobody's going to do karaoke there anymore. Because that's what he was. I mean, when I met him, he was all about that karaoke. I mean, he literally went, this is a funny story. We had this sort of partner. He was like super, super excited to like do karaoke. Like we had this like formal meeting going on, and he just like towards the end of the meeting, halfway through, he just leaves. And then we go to the like reception area or whatever afterwards. And he is literally setting up the karaoke machine on his own. CEO of like Twilio Segment, setting up his own karaoke machine and just like ripping it. And he was so fun. It was really cool. I mean, definitely like I was like, frankly, I was gonna do it. And I was like, I'm kind of intimidated. Like, I know I'm bad at karaoke.
But did you do it?
No, I was a little intimidated. And there wasn't enough beer.
So speaking of being intimidated,
sorry.
How do we feel about the CDP space? No, I don't know. I'm just trying to transition you back to the. I couldn't find a good link there. But.
So one of the things that they were, or part of that post, obviously everybody kind of weighed in on their feelings around it. But I think the one of the interesting things was, it comes back to this question of like, is there like, what is the value that a CDP brings to the table? And you guys are, working with a CDP partner, working with Segment. So you're like enhancing Segment's value. And I think a lot of it comes down to like, you said it earlier, like, did you have an agency come in to actually help you instrument this? Because part of it is linking back to what are the business cases or the goals that you have and how you're going to drive those. What ultimately determines whether or not a CDP is going to give you value. But how do you, you being part of this the CDP value equation, so to speak, how do you kind of see that partnership with Segment around that, and also just how do you kind of help drive that vision with them to your mutual clients?
I guess that's a interesting question, because it's hard for us. We try not to recommend necessarily the tools. It's more like once you decide what you're going to work with, we're happy to support you.
Yeah.
But actually, Ed, our CEO, just wrote a couple of weeks ago. We'll have to share it in the comments when the podcast comes off, like a post about that basically is if you're a modern Shopify brand, you don't need a CDP, that you should be using BigQuery or just pushing the data back to Klaviyo is one of the reasons. And that we're so excited about this Klaviyo integration is because it's like actually what a lot of brands need to do, especially, I mean, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily tied to revenue, but if your goal is like trying to just increase that retention marketing and build better audiences and stuff, you don't necessarily need like a full CDP anymore. It's just because those tools are all becoming stronger themselves. That's becoming like it's more likely that you need one if you're way more upmarket.
Right. So there's almost this like, as you mentioned, the tool's becoming stronger. So you're working now with Klaviyo CDP, which is a marketing automation. What was just a marketing automation tool is now becoming a cloud network almost, or a provider of that. Klaviyo kind of being your first stop in that CDP expansion. But are there other partners that you see that also have that kind of similar flavor of like these tools are becoming better? We're not necessarily going to need such a full impact solution here to drive value.
It's funny. We were just talking this morning about, I was at NRF, this show, the last couple of days, and definitely some of our biggest brands are using Braze.
Right.
I think actually some of our shared customers.
Yep.
But, we love the Braze.
And so, but for right now, if they're using us and Braze, they're using Segment in between.
Right.
But maybe eventually there's a way to just go right back, because Braze really has. I mean, I've been very impressed. I hadn't seen it in action in a while, and some of my brands were showing me, and it's kind of like it really is covering like all of the touch points now.
Yeah.
And there are some other tools too, but that's the one that's really been on our minds. It's like maybe we should just go deeper there, but then how many customers would we really be supporting to start, that sort of thing.
Right. That makes sense.
Because it's a big technical lift. All these things seem easy, and this is what we found. To really do it right,
right,
it's a big lift.
I can imagine. I mean, there's certainly a lot, because you own that client to server integration, so to speak. Like that's your sweet spot. I imagine there's a ton of use cases, with Braze and the other folks around that, because ultimately they have the same, identifying mechanism, right? Where they want to kind of stitch that, client side web data to whatever server side data that you're sending, and you use a unified identifier around that. Obviously, in a marketing automation tool, you can use the PII data. It's meant for that. So it's a little bit easier to join it up.
But do you guys do, I actually don't know, Braze implementations at the beginning? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is that a long process?
6 weeks is like the basic package. That's for their SMB. And then, Steven's worked on ones that have been like a year plus.
Yeah, it depends on how many use cases ultimately they got to bring in. But generally like 6 to 12 weeks to activation.
Huh.
Pretty fast.
Maybe the two of you can just give us each like a minute, like kind of summation on the thesis that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, it's all about smart growth. I mean, it sounds like a catchphrase, but it's really true that it's about like, if you can align on your top goal, not just your top 3 goals, but like really what is your goal as a brand this year, then you can figure out your data play.
I like that. Yeah. That was very eloquently said. If my goal is to make more money, then my data play is to make more data.
Well, I mean, I would push back. Making more money is a bit too broad.
Right, of course. But that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? Like that's the ultimate goal of all the different initiatives. I'd say, from what we talked about, some of the things that really come back to mind are particularly what you had mentioned around the the compliance with different laws, local laws across different shops, and making sure that data is accurately tracked, which is a really hard problem to solve that you guys have managed to solve. So having a good kind of web attribution side of things. And then I really like your kind of philosophy around like thinking about how your tool will kind of integrate with tools in the future, where the expansion opportunity lies, and particularly like I like what you said about how we're going to integrate with Twilio in the future, how people are using that to integrate with tools like Braze and what are some of the other partners that may be there in the future. So I do think there's a lot of great stuff that's going to happen this year in terms of what the different platforms build, and you guys, of course, continuing to solve a problem that I don't think anybody else has really solved as well as you have. Definitely a lot more in the mobile attribution space, but not really in this web's like e-commerce space. Like I think you guys are there might be other players, but you're the only ones I know.
Oh, I like it.
Oh man, this freaking thing, like I'm going to kill this thing. It just keeps...
You know what? It's not an inanimate object. It has feelings, and so you need to apologize to it.
I'm sorry. Actually, you know what? So has nothing to do with that.
Can we get that on a loop? Just, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'll be like those YouTubers that say something like really offensive, and they're like crying, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry.
Leave Britney alone."
This isn't relevant. I keep like like that. And this brings me back to, I won't name any names, but we had a client who used to use, I'll call it a legacy old school email platform. It wasn't working properly. So the client and us, Ragnarok, and just ESP, we all jumped on, and they had their specialist support person. He didn't know anything about anything. And he kept going, and at one point he said, I got a frog in my throat. At which point I was on the phone with one of our team members, and we just looked at each other. We were like, we need to get off this. So that's nothing to do with anything. I just wanted to share that. One other thing is that recently, as in several months ago, indeterminately in the past, on January 12th, you spoke with Ed, Ari's business partner, for a LinkedIn Live / let's not call it a webinar.
Yes.
And do you mind giving us like just a quick little like plug about what you guys talked about? And we can include a link to that as well in the podcast here.
Yes, that indeterminate time ago, which at the time of this recording was last week. So I did speak with Edward at the Littledata team. We talked a lot about the new Klaviyo CDP integration that they're launching, as well as what the value of the Klaviyo CDP is for e-commerce clients. I think was a pretty great conversation. You get a lot of my rambling there as well. Yeah, definitely check it out if you want to learn a little bit more about just our opinion on that, as well as like what Littledata will support there. I think there's a lot of useful tips there for sure.
Cool. tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Coming at you from Ed and Steven. I would like to say thank you very much, Ari.
Yeah, good having you on, Ari.
All
Good
the
to be
way
here.
from the Upper West.
Oh, but West Side.
A train on the A train.
That's right.
A train on the A train, riding express.
Hey.
Get out there, like us, and check out Littledata. Coming at you, pre-recorded from New York City.
Bow, bow, bow.